many times have you heard, this is a very important election, but you're not even sure how to cast your vote or the issues you're voting on, or quite frankly, sometimes if even your vote matters? Join us for a riveting conversation with the community on what you need to know before you vote. Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm your host, Dr. Ravi Perry, and joining me today are Howard University Associate Professor Dr. Marcus Board Jr. and author of the new book, Invisible Weapons, and the Collegiate Ambassador, co-lead of Black Girls Vote, Autumn C. Grant. Welcome, welcome to both of you. Let's jump right into the conversation by first hearing from the people. We asked if they were registered to vote, and here's how they responded.
Yes, I'm a registered voter.
Yes, I am definitely registered to vote.
Yes, I'm registered to vote.
Yes, I am registered to vote.
I am registered to vote, yes.
Yes, I am registered to vote. This will be the 57th time in the last 100 years that I've voted.
Now that we have heard from residents here throughout the DMV, the people, Autumn, what say you? Are we surprised to have this number of responses to people saying they are in fact registered to vote? And the commitment of that one gentleman, 57 years. Or in 2022, is this merely a representation of Americans simply doing their due diligence?
Yes, so first, I don't think it is uncommon that a lot of people are registered, right? Because that is a process that in many places, especially for people, in Maryland and in the DC area, you can register to vote with the MVA. Therefore, you can go right when you're getting your license and other documents, and it's constantly updated as you go to renew. But what people a lot of times don't understand is that it's important to keep up with your voter registration because your items and your information can change. So for the gentleman that has been voting all these years, if he hasn't lived in the same community for that whole time, the same address, he'll have different representatives, different representation, and sometimes might not understand that his voter registration may not be up to date. And so it's important for people to make sure that their documents are kept current so that they can always participate, especially since a lot of places are inflicting and bringing up ID laws that also connect to how you're able to vote, meaning they will check your ID, they'll ask for signatures and things like that, and that also impacts how you're able to vote in different ways, in person or via mail. So, yeah.
Thank you, Autumn. Dr. Bohr, what do you say? Was this representative of the numbers of people that you know of that say they are in fact registered to vote and do in fact turn out?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting subset of people that they have there, folks who are registered to vote, but it's also one of those things where people aren't always comfortable saying that they're not registered to vote. So not saying that the people we saw were lying to us, but just saying that there is a significant group of people, as Autumn was saying, who are not registered to vote or who have been purged from voter rolls. And so one of the challenges in the US in particular is that there are practices of kicking people off voter rolls in different areas in different states. And obviously the DMV is in a pretty good space right now in terms of those rules and laws, but it's always under threat. And so it's something that keeping people diligent and engaged is always really important. I think in the United States, we have a disproportionate burden placed on voters to be engaged, to be informed, to be involved. I hate that that's the case, but that's what we're facing right now unless we figure out a way to make our representatives do better for us.
So voting does in fact matter?
Oh, 100%.
Voting
Absolutely.
and being engaged, voting and being involved in your communities, voting and being involved in your schools and in your networks and in your neighborhoods. Like, it can't just be the vote.
Next, we asked our fine DMV residents if they are aware of the many ways in which to cast their vote. And they responded with this.
You can go online and request an absentee. You can vote in person. I know that and you can mail in.
There are several ways that you can cast your vote. You can go in person, you can mail, or you can use the drop box.
We can do it via in person, or we can do it through mail-in, for what I know.
Well, you can pre-registration, you can do mail-in voting, you can go to the site to do it. There's a lot of, that's great, the improved things that have been done around that, but there's still people trying to suppress that, and we must still push back. Okay.
Now, you both know we live in a very educated region here in the DMV area with so many colleges and universities. This was certainly a very informed group. But in response to the gentleman who said that you can vote on the website, correction, of course, you cannot vote online. However, we can request an absentee ballot. And he brought up an excellent point. Autumn, can you respond to the concern about voter suppression and if that's a real voter sentiment? And are voters in fear of not having their full voting rights honored? Is that fear justified?
Yes, so it is very much justified. Anyone that has been paying attention, engaged and informed and following these conversations as they've been happening in different legislative bodies and in different circles where they're debating and talking about rules around voting and voter registration, it absolutely is a threat that people are trying to be removed from voting lists and not be able to cast their ballot in ways that are helpful to them. One of the things that causes this is just misinformation, right? So we see the people, they understand that they do have the options in which to cast their vote, but not understanding or being informed about all of the implications. For example, in the state of Maryland, if you go if you request the ballot and then you don't actually send in the ballot and you go to show up and vote in person, your vote will be placed in a system that we call provisional, which means that it will be counted after all of the votes, the initial votes have come in, and then after the first wave of the mail-in ballots have already come in. So that just puts you in a very different category, and it's not that your vote will not count, but it's just that people need to be aware and understanding of how their votes really do go through the voter process. It's also important for people to understand that because of the misinformation that is out there, because it is easy to take advantage of people that don't know all of the systems and things that are in place, or may not have the time to educate themselves, that they have to understand what documents are actually needed. Your vote, if it is mailed in, if the signature isn't right on the back, if they don't certify it, if they feel that maybe the ballot was opened at some point in the process, different things like that before you actually go to drop it off, or if you take it to, or just put it back into the mailbox. All of those things are potential hindrances for how your vote will be counted when it is time to tally the votes. So absolutely yes. And the best way to combat that, like I said, is information, educating yourself on the process.
Thank you, Autumn. And Marcus, what are your observations? Are residents concerned about voter suppression? Should they be concerned about voter suppression?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, everything Autumn said is 100% accurate. And I think one of the ways I think people should be thinking about this is that the reason why voting is made so complicated for a lot of people is because of this imaginary problem of voter fraud, which camera one, camera two does not exist, right? Like, it's not a thing. So when people are talking about the value and the meaning of their votes, one of the big things that they're actually saying and conveying through that conversation, because as we know, politics disproportionately gets kind of lumped into voting. What they're actually saying is that the process isn't clear. Who I'm voting for isn't obvious. If they're going to actually do what I'm asking them to do and be representative is something that we haven't necessarily seen, right? And so we know that a lot of elected officials go out of their way to say, this is what I've accomplished, these are my wins, et cetera. But a lot of them also don't have the conversation about where they came up short, what battles they're fighting, even if they know they're going to lose. And I think those conversations need to be had even with voters. The problem then becomes, when are voters going to get the opportunity to even get all this information, right? When are people in general going to be able to have access to content, to be able to keep up with who's running this year and who's not, right? And you can print out a website. I was just looking at one in the Uber on the way over here, but like, the reality is, I got a whole PhD. That's a lot of information. I can't keep up with all that. It's impossible. And I think those complications are deliberate, and I think it's something that needs to happen to simplify these processes and these conversations so that people actually can value their vote and not be so insecure about whether or not it's going to matter.
And finally, we asked if DMV thought that their vote mattered, and here's what they said.
In DC, I wonder if my vote counts, the bigger picture. However, yes, your vote does, even though you're like one person and you don't think that your vote counts, it does make up the overall numbers and the voice of the people. And if you don't vote, whatever your voice is, isn't heard or counted. So it's very important to vote.
Absolutely.
We saw that in the November, the gubernatorial election, that some people sat home. So if you want change, if you want things done, don't sit beside on the couch. Get out and vote, because your vote matters. And right now it really, really, really matters.
Actually, I know my vote matters. And I strongly believe that, because I know that our ancestors worked very hard to make sure that our votes counted. And I think that I'd love to take care of that opportunity and just do my due diligence and, vote.
My vote matters because it's my contribution to the system that says I support one party or the other, and I have goals that I'd like to see that party achieve in terms of representing all the people, not just one party.
And Autumn, really quickly, what are some of your thoughts on the resident shouting from the rooftop that, she knows that her vote counts, but then you have the uncertainty of another resident, saying whether it counts at all?
Yeah, so I do appreciate the fact that people understand that their vote matters, but what also matters is the collective community coming together. So it's not just you going to cast your vote, but maybe bringing others with you, telling other people, and making sure that others in your community are informed so that they can also cast their votes, because it is all about community and coming together. But absolutely, I can see why there is skepticism, because sometimes, and like we'd mentioned previously, if you're showing up to vote, you're doing all of this research on your own, and you're still feeling like you're coming up short because the answers that you're getting from your elected officials and your leaders are not what you think they should be. It can be discouraging to feel like your vote doesn't count. So I'm not surprised that there's skepticism, but it is having that sense of community helps to understand that your vote does matter.
Dr. Board?
Hard agree. I think we live in a society in the United States where individualism really drives a lot of political participation. And when it comes to the vote, obviously it's one person, one vote. But to Autumn's point, as you collaborate and build community around these rights, you're able to find a deeper connection to the process, right? You're able to do the voting and, like I was mentioning before, you're able to vote and you're able to advocate. And I think that's one of the things that people don't necessarily get trained well to do, is to advocate for themselves in political spaces. So we have to create processes whereby people are able to learn what their rights are in terms of their own advocacy. So as the one person said, my ancestors died for the right to vote, they also died for our right to organize and assemble. And so we have to activate a lot of those rights in order to make sure that we are building the momentum that we need, not just as a community, but even individually. You need momentum to be able to get this work done. It's not something that you can wake up in November and say, oh, today I can vote. It's like you have to really be prepared for that. And that takes connection, it takes community, and that takes effort.
Activate, engage, and vote. I really have enjoyed the conversation today. Thank you both for all the information you've shared with DMV residents. Now moving on to the issues that are concerning our DC residents like me. Joining us again are Autumn Grant from Black Girls Vote and community activist Ronald Moten. Thank you both for joining us and sharing your expertise, and of course for your passion and for educating our viewers on these most important issues that matter to DC residents. So first, let's hear from those residents. And when asked what issues they're most concerned with, here's what DC had to say.
People's rights, freedom, homelessness, hunger, stuff like that.
What matters is the fact that the Voting Rights Act is being under threat, and that the citizenship of America is under attack inside America. And it's up to us, the people, the U.S. government, which represents the people, to stand up and make our voice heard, and for this president to make sure he encourages everyone to vote.
Now you just heard from DC residents. They're concerned with people's rights, helping the homeless population, and simply whether or not their vote is secure. What do you think about the issues that they've raised and some of the concerns that they mentioned? Mr. Moten.
Well, I think in D.C. our vote is protected, but I think our voters must be educated. For instance, in past elections in D.C., for the at-large candidacy, most people don't know that you have 2 votes. And a lot of people don't want these people to know that they have 2 votes, right? Because the status quo always wins when we undervote. So east of the river, and particularly where I'm from, you had, I think, over 40,000 people who only voted one time, or it was 40,000 people in the election who only did one vote, may I say. And that's very, very critical that we educate the people to the power they vote, because people died for us to have this power. And there are a lot of issues in this election that affect us from a local level and a national level, and why we must ensure that everybody is an educated voter and votes on the issues.
Autumn, the work that Mr. Moten does with a boots on the ground effort and other organizations throughout east of the river in D.C., they have had a lot of issues that have been affected recently with redistricting and other concerns that are coming up in the midterm elections. What are some of those concerns?
So a lot of the concerns center around basically voter awareness, right? And like we just discussed, when you don't know, you can really mute the power of someone's vote. So a lot of those issues around redistricting is helping to people just to understand now where their new boundaries are, making sure that they've updated and kept current their voter registration so that they know where to go. Most times if you've been redistricted, you now have new representation. You're maybe going to a new polling location. You're not voting at the same place. And all of those things are very important to know before you show up on election day. And redistricting is also very important in terms of the overall aspect of voter information, because then the issues that directly affect you do change based on the district that you're ascribed to.
Mr. Moten, what about Initiative 82? I know you're a business owner. What say you about the initiative on tipping?
So, I mean, it's like one of those issues where it's like 50-50. A lot of people support it and want it to happen because a lot of people can't make it off below minimum wage salaries. But at the flip side, a lot of people who were getting tipped were making way above minimum wage from these jobs. So it's one of those issues that I think the people have to decide. But I think, once again, people need to be educated on. And this is throughout the city. And the other thing I wanted to say to your last question, we have 57 seats that are not filled, that are vacant by ANCs in Washington, D.C., that nobody's running for. So we need people to do write-in candidates for those seats, because people got to understand, when you don't have your ANC, control your ANC, other people come in and take control of your community. So that's over 100,000 people who will be represented, right, by ANC seats if we don't do our due diligence and letting people know you can run, get 25 votes, and be an ANC, decide what comes into your community benefits packages and things like that, which the community must have a say-so in what happens in our community.
In Autumn, many of those ANCs have been struggling with crime, have had many other significant issues, and we know with this Attorney General's race that's happening in D.C., much of what the Attorney General does in D.C. deals with juvenile justice issues.
Correct.
A lot of people don't really remember that that's primarily what that office does. But also, of course, Mayor Bowser is up for re-election again. What are some of the issues that folks are concerned about in terms of those two races?
Yes, so one of the things that's very important with the Attorney General's race is that we have shifted to a space where we're looking at being a fully elected position rather than an appointed position. That means a lot, because it means the people literally have the direct power. And like you were saying, they do control and have a heavy and significant influence in crime and juvenile justice. And so for the people to have the power in their hands, it's not just an appointment by the mayor this time, it is a vote that's going in. I think it will show a lot of change. Hopefully there will be an opportunity for there to be some reassessments about the way maybe the office is run, things like that. But it does give people a chance to be even more engaged, even more connected, and have the ability to participate. And to Mr. Moten's point, becoming a part of your ANC and joining and putting the work in to make those connections happen, connected to and combined with the power that the people are actually voting for the Attorney General this time, it makes a huge difference.
So we can't leave D.C. without talking about statehood and without talking about schools. You just mentioned, Autumn, about how there's different power differentials between the Attorney General's office and what they can do, what the mayor can do. We know that in D.C. the mayor controls schools. And so, but we also know the school district is 80% African American and has a less than 50% passage rate of young kids in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. What can we do with the schools in D.C. and what say you about statehood? Does that matter?
Well, I think that statehood matters, but I think we need to get our mess straight first. when you talk about D.C., you talk about the attorney generals, you talk about the schools, you can tell by the zip code in our city what type of education our children are going to get. The amount of children who are not going to school, to our schools east of the river, is criminal, right? And we must have our agencies, the attorney general's office, the public school system, everybody work together. There's no 13 absences supposed to have a child referred to the attorney, Child and Family Services to get help and services. These are the children that we see out in the street committing crimes a lot of times every day. They disengage. We have to make sure that our Attorney General and everybody is re-engaging these children, right? Making sure the system is working for our babies and our families. And a lot of things have happened. A lot of money has been put in the community, but it's not just about saying, okay, I'm doing criminal justice reform, and a child carjacks me today, and he's out tonight, and we don't have no plan to make sure your mother is not carjacked tomorrow.
And Autumn, really quickly, what does statehood have to do with this election coming up?
Statehood is very important because it changes the way that the city will be able to have autonomy over itself. It has implications for taxes, for social connections, and for a lot of the economic development that is going to be concerned with the city. So I think statehood, it's an important conversation, it's a very complex conversation, but it is a conversation that needs to be happening, especially as we're looking forward to a continuation of an administration, meaning that you'll have Mayor Bowser continuing in her position, going through to the general, but really looking at what it'll mean to have those longer lasting administrative effects and impacts.
Or we can use our National Guard.
That too. Autumn, what are those deadlines to register to vote here in the District of Columbia?
All right, the DC Board of Elections began sending mail-in ballots to registered voters on October 3rd. Mail ballot drop boxes open on October 14th, and then your deadline to receive all of your voter registration applications is October 18th.
And the deadline to request absentee ballots is October 24th, and the deadline for those overseas to request absentee ballots is November 5th, and the early voting period is from Halloween until November the 6th. General Election Day is, of course, Tuesday, November the 8th.
My birthday.
And the deadline, your birthday, Mr. Moten. Happy early birthday. Are there any closing remarks either one of you may have about what are the issues that matter to D.C. residents?
I would say economics, anything that impacts the workforce and economics, especially things like Initiative 82, are very important going into this election.
I would say equity. As we move forward going into a recession, it's going to be very important to make sure the small businesses, the everyday people are able to stay in our city. So we're dealing with gentrification, and you have to do that through policy. And I tell people, just look at people who are pushing policies. The most important thing about elected officials, are they crafty enough to get policies drafted and passed that affect the people? And that's what it's all about. And we have several issues in D.C., from housing to crime to equity to education, right, that we need to address and empowering people who were here when nobody wanted to be here.
You know, those are some of the challenges in D.C. that are not unique to D.C. in that, D.C. is an urban, of course, community, but it is unique in that, D.C. is a district. It's not a state. It's not a municipality. And so because of that, the power that some of these elected officials have, let's say, like Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, right, who is a delegate because she does not get the same congressional power that other Congress members get. What can those elected officials do better in terms of pushing those policies?
So I think that in D.C., we've done a great job of, first of all, advocating for statehood, getting other people involved. But we got to do even more because we're close. We're very close. Like I think we were talking earlier, the Senate can possibly change over to getting more, and I'm independent, but I'm saying more Democrats in there, 1 or 2 votes in another direction, and we can get the vote to be a state, right? So I think it's important to continue to push our issues, right, but also support our local officials, Eleanor Holmes Norton, Mayor Bowser, and everybody when they advocate and tell us to stand up. The squeaking wheel gets everything they need.
Well,
in this city and throughout the world.
Yes, and that goes for all elected officials, regardless of course, party. And you got a couple weeks, D.C. voters, to participate in this election, and hopefully you paid attention to those deadlines and on the screen. Thank you so much, both of you, for your wonderful expertise and for informing D.C. residents on how to vote in this coming election. Now moving the conversation on to Maryland and the issues that are concerning our residents there. And again, joining us is Autumn Grant from Black Girls Vote and Reverend Krishan Natesan, Senior Pastor of Love African Methodist Episcopal Church. Thank you for sharing your expertise and your passion and for educating our viewers on these most important issues in Maryland. Let's hear from those viewers and Maryland residents on the issues that matter to them most.
The upkeep of the county and, you know, everything like the roads and stuff that we use day to day instead of like going into disrepair. That's probably much more important to me instead of like more in international affairs or anything. Like we got to take care of our own area more than anything.
What matters the most to me in the upcoming election is getting the right person in the office that works for we the people.
There are three things that matter to me. One is women's rights, because we've overturned Roe versus Wade. The second is voters' rights, because we are seriously, what's the good word? We are seriously limiting voters' rights. And the third is the economy.
The most pressing issue concerning this area is crime. The number of guns that the youth have. So that's the most important issue that I'm concerned about.
Equal justice matters to me. You know, I don't think it's fair how they treat us black folk and brown minorities because of, you know, the pay raises and the crimes when if say a Caucasian get caught with marijuana and you got a black person get caught with the same little, maybe a nickel bag or something. In some states it's legal, some states it's not. But it seems like, I don't care where we are, we the ones who get the brunt end of it, you know, and I don't think it's fair.
Autumn, what do you say about the issues that they raised in Maryland?
So certainly for the last gentleman talking about the unequal prosecution of marijuana in the state of Maryland, absolutely correct. There are a lot of studies that show that there is inequity in how that's prosecuted. But one thing that's very important to remember is that marijuana is up on the ballot this November for the state of Maryland. Marylanders will have the chance to vote yes or no, yes being we would like to legalize recreational use of marijuana, not just the medical that does already exist in the state of Maryland, but the recreational use to those over 21 and expanding that opportunity out to, you know, businesses, community members, and everyone that will, you know, benefit and have an implication of that legalization of marijuana. So that certainly is something to be aware of. I hope that gentleman does know, or he will know, that that is on the ballot and he has that choice. But that will certainly impact our criminal justice system overall, taking that burden of prosecuting and handling those marijuana convictions, a lot of times very small convictions, and moving also the needle on a lot of other social justice problems that we have, where we can now redirect our resources, redirect time, energy, and effort in criminal justice and in the court system to other social issues that do matter as well.
Reverend Natesan, can you talk about those social issues and how you as a pastor can respond to the issues that the Maryland residents had to say matter to them most?
While there were many issues that were discussed, more than I could even recount, but they were great. One thing I like was the passion of the people. And a lot of people will sometimes discount our communities and feel that we're not passionate about it, passionate about how our communities look, passionate about the issues, a woman's right to dictate her own health in terms of abortion rights, and to be able to have the right to choose for her own body. And then even with the marijuana issue, it's rather significant. And it's, I believe, number 4 on the ballot box for this election. And when we look at how situations like the decriminalization of marijuana can impact negatively individuals who then end up with incarceration for what we see on our same blocks now, commercial stores selling the very same thing. It just seems like great inequity. And we also heard inequity ring out when we were able to hear about having equal wages. And we know that statistically, African American males will make less than their white counterparts, but we also see that even our black females make less money than our black males. And so we want to see some balance in terms of just some equal pay for equal work.
We did see recently, of course, on the federal level that the Biden administration did make some moves as it relates to marijuana convictions and encourage governors and states to consider doing something similarly. But the issues that they raise, crime, the economy, equal justice, the upkeep of the community, Autumn, these are some very burning issues that matter to Marylanders. What are some of the other issues that Marylander voters really need to be concerned about as well?
Right. So one of the things that is very important to know and understand is that we are facing an election of entirely new constitutional officers for the state. So what that means is these are the people that are written in to have the most control at the executive and highest levels of the state. That is our governor, our comptroller, and our attorney general here in the state of Maryland. For example, the comptroller's race is very important because the comptroller sets a lot of the stage for the economic policy for the entire state. That is taxing, that is looking at codes for enforcement on a lot of economic matters, and it's for choosing how to spend the state's portfolio of money as far as it goes to larger scale items. One example being the Department of Natural Resources, the Board of Public Works, using all of those funds and investing back into the environment. That's something the comptroller would do. And people usually hear that position to think, oh, it's just money and filing and taxes. They're the people that come after me if I don't pay. But it's more than that. They have a direct hand in whether or not your child will have a lush green grass to play on, or whether that money will go to some other project that is funded. So it's really about paying attention to how all of these elected constitutional officers working together, your governor, your comptroller, and your attorney general, to make a lot of those other social issues come together.
And I know, Reverend Natesan, that, you know, a lot of churches have been engaged over the decades, of course, but also I want to highlight contemporarily, too, in today's times as well, but helping people get registered to vote, particularly those who have been incarcerated and are re-entering the community, may have convictions, and providing opportunities to them as well. What are some of the issues that you think Maryland voters continue to care about along those lines?
Well, I think that there are many in our community that feel like when you've served your time, then you need to be a citizen, and citizens have a right to vote. The good news is in Maryland that you can vote. You can vote in the state of Maryland. There are certain limitations if you have sold votes or tried to be engaged in things directly with crimes related to voting. But there are many, many wide range of ways that you can still qualify to vote. So many people can still vote. And I think that is significant because there's a misnomer that if you've been convicted of a felony that you cannot vote. But in Maryland, you can vote. And you need to vote because your vote is your voice. And if we're going to see our community stronger, and I heard a gentleman say he wanted to see the right person get in, you got to let your voice speak for that right person by exercising your voice through your vote.
And how do they exercise their voice through their vote? What are the registration deadlines and the important dates for Marylanders to pay attention to between now and that ever important Tuesday, November the 8th?
Yes, so early voting will be held for 8 days and begins on October 27th. You can vote from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you can drop off your ballot at any early voting site. And then early voting ends November 3rd. You have to be registered to vote by October 18th, and you have to request your mail-in ballot by November 1st. Your mail-in ballots must be postmarked or dropped off at any election ballot box by November 8th at 8 p.m. on Election Day. It's very important to make sure that you're keeping up on all the deadlines.
That might also mean, just really quickly, that you may not get results on that Tuesday, right?
Right, but actually in the state of Maryland, the Board of Elections has gone back and forth with now gubernatorial candidate Dan Cox. to make sure that the ballots that have been mailed in can begin counted as soon as they come in. That was a legal battle that was lost earlier in the primary with the governor's veto, but now that we've moved on to the general election, the Board of Elections has changed that. So it should be much quicker process this time. I know for the Maryland primary, it took almost 2.5 weeks for some people to see those results counted and coming in. So,
and we know how impatient all of us are on election night, wanting to know who is going to win and what our future looks like. Thank you both, Reverend Natesan and again, Autumn Grant, for your conversation today and informing voters in Maryland about how they can best participate in this election. It is indeed another very important election in our lifetimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, moving on with the conversation to discuss the issues that are concerning our residents in the great Commonwealth of Virginia. And joining me is Sabrina. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and passion and for, of course, always educating us on the most important issues in this upcoming election. But first, before I get to you, Sabrina, can we hear from those residents? And can we hear what matters to them most in Virginia?
The things that matter most to me are making sure that all Americans are represented in an election and getting back and putting people in office who will restore a woman's right to choose, provide health care for all, as opposed to giving tax breaks to rich people.
What matters to me the most in the upcoming election is the abortion issue and the gun issue.
What matters most to me this upcoming election is making sure that we have someone in power that would help women protect our abortion rights. As we know right now, it's a little crazy in all the different states who are now not allowing women to get abortions in many different circumstances. And as a nurse, I know how unsafe that is, so I'm hoping that the person that we do elect would do something to prevent that from happening.
What matters most is that people know their rights and they're aware of each person, what they represent and what they stand for. I think it's really important because there's not a lot of transparency that goes through the media, and especially about what's accessible and what's important to other people. And I think not enough people, especially what happened during COVID, I think a lot of people didn't know a lot of what was going on and what they could represent and what mattered to them. So I think more information about that's being publicly released, and also just more transparency in general.
Ooh, Sabrina, those were some issues, right? Gun violence, of course, the women's right to choose, given the Dodd decision of the Supreme Court recently, but also the issue of transparency. What do you have to say about those issues that Virginians mentioned?
Sure. I think on the issue of transparency first, I think that's really important. We have to make sure that constituents are understanding what their representatives and what their potentially elected representatives are kind of what they stand for, what they're going to do if they are elected into office. I think what voters can do to sort of enhance that transparency if they don't feel that the representatives or their candidates are doing that already is to do their own research, sort of look into what each candidate is, their platform, what they stand for, what they've done if they're an incumbent, and be sure that they are aligning themselves with a candidate that can put forth what they believe in. And secondly, I think in terms of the women's right to choose, which is a really hot button issue after the Roe v. Wade overturning and the Dobbs decision, is to, again, see what your representatives are talking about. It's really difficult, as a woman, and, when that is a big thing for a lot of women, while also, on either side, there's a lot of different arguments. So you want to make sure that whatever you align yourself with is sort of what your candidate aligns themselves with specifically. In gun rights and gun violence, I think we're seeing grow more and more. In Virginia alone, between 2018 and 2021, gun-related incidents have gone up by 75%. And so that's from the Virginia Department of Health. And so it's an increasing issue that I can only imagine is really on the minds of Virginia citizens. And it's also becoming really real for people who are being personally affected by gun violence, who a neighbor, a loved one, either killed or injured in a gun-related incident. And so I think it's really important to get close with your community, kind of rally behind your community and those who have been affected by that to show that this is a huge issue, not just for an individual, but for the entire community, so that your representatives and your candidates can see that that is something that's important to you and that is something that they should be focusing on as well.
And we've seen some of that in the Commonwealth of Virginia with the current gubernatorial administration, pushing, for example, certain kinds of issues in schools, certain kinds of issues and policies respective to trans individuals. And you mentioned the right to choose and how women and trans men, of course, also have that opportunity, and that they, perhaps in some people's view, that is an issue that really matters in this election. But again, we still heard about the transparency concerns that some voters have too. Can you say a little bit more about why that might be on voters' minds?
I think that's in voters' minds right now because, as one of the citizens mentioned, sort of the COVID outbreak and how that sort of led to a lot of issues with transparency, how we didn't really know a lot of what was going on in terms of the science behind it, the political statements behind it, and sort of how divided we were as a country during that time. And we really didn't know the truth of what was going on. So I think there's some disappointment after that a lot of citizens are feeling that they don't know what's going on in Congress, and they don't really have a say in sort of what their candidates and their overall representatives are doing in Congress. There's not a lot of information being given, even once they are elected or even during the election race. So I think there just needs to be more information given, but that can also be done on the part of the citizen to kind of do some more research too.
It's always a perennial complaint. I feel like everything about government not telling me this and not giving me this in time. But ultimately, I love your point, Sabrina, that it's ultimately the citizen's responsibility to go out and seek that information, because ultimately it is our responsibility to exercise that right to vote. But some other things implicate our ability to do that exercising of the right to vote in ways that are equitable. So can you talk a little bit more about redistricting and how that's affecting Virginians in this current cycle?
Sure. So as a result of the Virginia Redistricting Committee not being able to effectively create maps, the Virginia Supreme Court created legislative maps that are redistricting both the General Assembly and Virginia congressional districts. So right now we're seeing that a lot of voters who are specifically in Chesterfield, for example. Chesterfield, Virginia was a part of the 7th District, which was represented by a Democratic representative, and now they're a part of the 1st District, which is represented by a Republican representative. And so that also has consequences for where you're going to be voting. So make sure that you are taking a lot of time to see if your voting location has changed since these redistricting maps have been drawn, because it might be a different location, you might have a different representative, you might even have a completely different district number, and that has some that can lead to frustration. So I recommend voting early, trying to make sure that you know where you're going to be voting before the actual election day to make sure that your vote counts.
We know, the phrase, of course, more money, more problems. And, the challenge that Virginia has is this idea of this reduction of our inflation. So when you talk about this Inflation Reduction Act, Virginia, we know, receives some of the largest federal appropriations, has a huge budget vis-a-vis many other states. But what is this Inflation Reduction Act about?
So the entire act is as a result of Joe Biden's sort of initiatives during his campaign that he was talking about. A lot of climate change, the Affordable Care Act continuing and to provide premium subsidies and sort of to keep prescription drugs sort of costs lower. There's also some tax conversations about taxes and, sort of taxing the rich more, which I know was something that one of the citizens in the videos mentioned. So that is just enacted at the end of August, and so that is starting to take effect, but really we won't see much of the effects until 2025 because a lot of it is going to obviously take some time. But the essential bare bones of it is that a lot of households will be sort of getting some tax credits for their energy efficiency, solar panels if there's solar panels on the house, anything that's sort of helping to further the climate change sort of improvements. There'll be tax credits given there, as well as for carbon emissions. If there's companies or households specifically that are ensuring that they keep their carbon emissions low, there'll be tax credits granted there as well. And then overall, there's been money sort of funded for ensuring that prescription drug costs can go down by 2025. And hopefully we'll be seeing that specifically for seniors who are, mainly kind of affected by the fact that, they have more prescription drug prescriptions, and that can be a financial burden on them as well.
Well, I think those are, some of the hot button issues, of course, that are affecting local residents in Virginia, along with parks and recreation issues and metro transportation concerns and even AAA general obligation bond ratings, all municipal kinds of issues that we need to care about. But if I live in Virginia, when can I vote, and how do I vote, and what do I do between now and November 8th?
Sure. So early voting is going on right now. Early voting is going on right now as of September 23rd, so you can start your early voting now. However, there are early voting Saturdays, both on October 29th and November 5th. So you can take advantage of those and get your early voting done on those Saturdays. If you have not registered to vote yet, the last day to register to vote is for the November election is October 17th, and the last day to apply for your absentee, either online, by mail, or fax, is October 28th. All ballots must be received in person by 7 p.m. or postmarked by November 8th.
Well, are there any closing remarks you may have on Virginians and their issues that matter to them in this election coming up?
I think the only thing I could say in closing is that everyone should be voting this cycle. It's an important election, as always. The midterms, I think, are overlooked just because it's not the presidential election. So people think that it might not be as important, but it's just as important as the presidential election. And also just get more involved. Become a poll person and volunteer at your local polling station because that is how you can sort of show the community that you are interested in this topic. It also helps with overall transparency. You're there counting the ballots. You can see sort of what is actually going on and making sure that it is being done correctly and properly.
Sabrina, thank you for joining us, telling us about the issues that matter to the residents of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Of course.
And we are excited to see what Virginians do in this coming election.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
As a proud Howard University professor in the political science department, it is my honor to welcome our next guest to hear their perspective on the youth vote. Welcome to members of Black Girls Vote, which has chapters both at American University and at Howard University. I'm joined by two ladies, Genesis and Lena, two dynamic leaders, sophomores at American University. It's a wonderful opportunity to welcome you both to represent the youth vote. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Let's talk about youth engagement. So what are we all missing in terms of reaching out to young people?
I think the main thing is when it comes to voting, people don't really think about the younger generations. I think a lot of campaigns are geared towards like the older generation, and I think a lot of the younger generations gets lost in like social media and TikTok and what other young people are like misconstruing in like the voting world. So like I think campaigns can be more geared towards like our younger generations.
Lena?
Yeah, I agree with what she's saying. I feel like if people who are running for office gear their campaign and their political points towards young people, because that's who's going to be coming up in the future, I feel like it would be better to get them involved, because I feel like even me as a young person, I feel like people are not really talking to me, or they're not talking to my peers. So I feel like if I feel like I'm involved or I feel welcome, then I will be more involved politically.
So it's important that we see
that
from our government officials, from our political parties, from our local boards of elections, that they are all doing outreach to ensure that young people know where to vote, what the issues are, and what matters in their community.
Yes.
That's great. What other issues would you say are really important to young people? Are there certain things on the minds of young people today?
I feel like just our generation as a whole likes to have their voice heard. So I feel like if they feel like their voice is going to be heard, then they'll go out and vote. But I feel like a lot of young people don't think that their voice is going to be heard, and they don't feel like they're going to be seen, so they don't, I don't want to say waste their time and go vote, but they don't feel like it's going to have an impact, so they don't go vote.
What can we do, Genesis, to get them to perhaps other fellow young people like yourself to go out and vote, even though they may not feel as though the system has really catered to them much?
Well, I believe that we can make voting, like the process, not more fun, but for example, I have a friend, he got a call one day and it was like a polling system, and they were asking him like his opinions on like certain candidates in his state, and he was like, at first he was like really engaged in the conversation, but then he got like bored, and like it was like getting like less, it was like very monotone, the person, it wasn't like he was speaking to the candidate, it was like a polling system, and it was like very automated. So I feel as if we could like speak to the candidates and be more personal for like our generations, and not more fun but more engaging with like campaigning and voting, then it'll bring like more voters out.
Yeah, I was one of those young people that used to do those phone calls for candidates and get people to try to go out and support one person or one issue or another. And those are opportunities as well that young people can do that. They can choose to volunteer for candidates or campaigns or issues that matter to you, and you might end up being one of the people making those phone calls that might be better than the automated calls that we get often from these polling companies. What can we say about the fact that you aren't only just young people, you're also members of other groups? And so, two wonderful young women. We know that young women of color in particular have been central to the wave of engagement and increasing voter participation over the last couple of election cycles. Do you expect young women voters to still have a large impact this coming election?
Yes, definitely. I feel like voting and the elections impact us most, because like our lives are on the line if we don't come out and vote. Like, for example, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and a lot of like key like laws that like allow us to vote, have our rights, can be taken away if we don't go out and vote and if our voices aren't heard.
Lena, what say you about the role of young women in politics today?
I agree with Genesis. I feel like a lot of young women like to advocate for other young women and other young people as well. So I feel like in the role of politics, they like to step up and go out, do voter registration drives, have events, make sure everyone's aware of voting in general.
Well, I really appreciate you both for joining us, because we want to ensure that we are engaging with young people and aren't talking at you, but are listening to you. And hopefully we can take the lessons you've shown those of us who are a little bit older than young, to engage with y'all to make sure that you participate in this upcoming cycle. Ladies, thank you so much. Good luck in school. And it's midterm season, right? So hopefully you're going back to go study. Thank you very much for joining us and helping explain why the youth vote matters in this upcoming election.
Thank you.
That concludes our Before You Vote special. I would like to thank the DMV and all of our guests for sharing their time, talents, and their conversation on the issues that matter the most to inform you before you vote. For more information, please find the following resources on your screen. We hope you have enjoyed the conversation, but most importantly, we hope you have been equipped to make informed decisions while in your respective polling places. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you at the polls on Election Day, Tuesday, November the 8th.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at whut.org. Thank you.